Do humans really think they can fight without limbs? The first explorer, Smith, wiggled his antennae with amusement as a burst of laughter erupted in the recreation room of the Star Claw warship. The young alien soldiers, their iridescent scales shimmering in the blue light, lounged on comfort cushions, sharing increasingly ludicrous tales about the most baffling species in the galaxy. "That's the most absurd thing I've ever heard," Smith continued, clicking his jaws mockingly, as if a damaged biological unit could continue fighting. Laughter spread through the group with their perfectly designed combat bodies, reinforced exoskeletons, and redundant organs. Such ideas struck them as utterly ridiculous. Officer Rich clicked his jaws in contempt. "That's nothing. I was reading your historical files yesterday. They have stories of warriors who fought for days on end without rest, as if any biological being could maintain combat effectiveness without proper regeneration cycles." In a corner of the room, Commander Gray sat silently. His weathered exoskeleton bore the marks of countless battles, deep grooves and poorly healed fractures that told their own stories. But he said nothing as the youngsters continued to mock. "My favorite," trilled Medical Officer Stone. "It's the one where they say something called adrenaline allows them to lift vehicles to save their young. Pure fantasy. The mechanical strength required, it would shatter that primitive bone structure made of calcium." The young aliens burst into another round of laughter, their bodies vibrating with giggles. They were the pride of the Galactic Defense Force. Each one genetically enhanced and cybernetically optimized for war. The idea that soft-bodied humans could match their capabilities seemed like a joke to them. "Did you know," added Engineer Rock, excitedly waving his upper limbs, which didn't even have backup organs. "Just a heart, 2 lungs. And if they lost them, it was over. How did they even get to space?" Commander Gray shifted slightly. His scarred hand unconsciously touched the prosthetic that replaced his lower limb. "Right." That gesture caught Medical Officer Stone's attention. "Commander," Stone asked, a note of respect in his voice. "You've been very quiet. Don't you find these human myths just as amusing?" The room fell silent. Gray was a legend among his ranks, with more than 50 campaigns under his belt. His mere presence commanded respect, and now all eyes were on him. Gray's external membranes flickered, a sign of deep thought among his kind. "Myths," he finally said, his voice rasping with age, "sometimes contain seeds of truth." The young men exchanged glances. Engineer Rock's antennae dipped slightly, a sign of confusion. "But, Commander," Gray interrupted, "don't tell me you believe what I believe is based on experience, not on archives or second-hand tales." He stood tall, imposing even among his own kind. "You mock what you don't understand, and that's dangerous for a warrior." Scout Smith's antennae froze mid-motion. "Commander, you have fought against humans." The recreation room fell silent. The veteran's external membranes began to flicker rapidly, and for the first time, the younger men noticed something unsettling, a visible tremor in the legendary warrior's movements at the mere mention of humans. "Fighting them." Gray's voice dropped to a whisper that chilled everyone's exostructures, forcing them to lean in to hear him. "I'm the only survivor from my unit who did it." His scarred hand unconsciously tightened its grip on his prosthetic limb. "And there's a reason the High Command enforces those peace treaties as if our lives depended on it. Because they did." The room became so quiet the soldiers could hear their second hearts beating. The taunts from before now seemed not only childish but dangerously naive as they watched their decorated commanding officer, a veteran of 50 campaigns, visibly disturbed by mere memories. "Sir," whispered Medical Officer Stone, barely moving his jaw. Commander Gray's compound eyes scanned them one by one, reflecting the cold blue light. Each young man felt the weight of his gaze like a physical burden filled with horrors they couldn't imagine. "They think they understand combat," he said finally, his voice firm. "They think their enhanced bodies make them invincible. We thought so too." He leaned forward, the scars on his exoskeleton gleaming in the light. "I'm going to tell you the truth about humans. A truth that's classified above your clearance level. A truth that haunts my nightmares. The young aliens drew closer, their laughter forgotten, suddenly aware that what they were about to hear would forever change their view of their place in the galaxy and the creatures they had so often mocked. Commander Gray's outer membranes flickered as he began his tale, his voice heavy with memories he'd rather forget. It was 30 cycles ago, during the expansion wars. My unit was considered elite, the best of the best. We had never failed a mission, never lost a fight. Our bodies were perfectly engineered for combat, and we knew it. Their jaws clicked softly. Pride was our first mistake. The young soldiers listened attentively as their commander continued. We were ordered to investigate a small human research outpost on the outer rim. Intelligence suggested it was weakly defended. Just a handful of scientists with basic security. The mission was simple: capture their technology and any survivors for study. He lowered his voice. We thought it would be easy. Gray shifted uncomfortably in his legs. There were 12 of us. Descending from orbit in stealth pods. The human facility was in a clearing surrounded by dense vegetation. They had basic perimeter sensors, but nothing that could detect our advanced cloaking technology. He paused for a moment, his compound eyes darkening slightly. We observed them for 3 days. They seemed so fragile, soft-skinned creatures going about their business, with no natural armor, no backup organs, no strength enhancements. We watched them eat, sleep, work. We thought they were an inefficient species. He clicked his jaws earnestly. How wrong we were. The recreation room remained completely silent as Gray continued. On the 4th day, we launched our attack at dawn. At first, everything went perfectly. We breached their perimeter without triggering any alarms. Our first target was their communications antenna, one precise shot and they were cut off. Gray's voice grew more tense. Then we ran into our first human defender, a lone guard caught out in the open facing 3 of our warriors. They fired clean hits straight to his torso. By all logic, he should have fallen immediately. The young soldiers leaned forward, the mockery gone from their faces. Instead, Gray continued, this human with holes in his body that would have killed any of us instantly, raised his weapon and returned fire. He killed 2 of our warriors before the 3rd could finish him off. His voice was hollow. We lost 2 elite soldiers to someone who should have been dead by now. Medical Officer Stone's antenna twitched in disbelief. But that's impossible. With wounds like that, blood loss is simply impossible, Gray interrupted, clenching his scarred hand. We thought so too, but that was just the beginning. His voice trailed off as his compound eyes clouded over, lost in a memory that still haunted him. Quick pause on the stream. Before we continue this galactic journey, if you're enjoying this unique sci-fi experience, subscribe to the channel now and, most importantly, hit the notification bell. That way, the YouTube algorithm will make sure you don't miss the upcoming videos with the most mind-blowing science fiction stories you won't find anywhere else. Now then, back to our story. The facility erupted in chaos, Gray continued, his voice hardening as he returned to the present. But not the kind we expected. The humans weren't panicking, they were coordinating. Their outer membranes quivered with the tension of the memory. Blood-covered researchers communicated with military precision. Hidden compartments opened, revealing arsenals of weapons. Combat armor emerged from beneath workstations that had seemed harmless. What we thought were mere scientists transformed before our very eyes into something completely different. Warriors who were waiting for us. He leaned forward, lowering his voice to almost a whisper. But that wasn't what shocked us the most. Commander Gray's scarred hand ran over the prosthetic that replaced his right lower limb. We were firing at them again and again, and they kept fighting. A human was hit by a plasma blast in the arm. The limb practically vaporized. She cauterized it herself with a piece of hot metal and kept firing with the other arm. The young aliens shifted uncomfortably as their commander continued. Another human was hit by one of our heavy weapons, the bullet shattering his leg. She crawled into a defensive position and held it for 20 minutes, taking out 3 of our warriors before bleeding out. Scout Smith's antenna dropped in disbelief. "How is that possible, Commander?" "That's what we couldn't understand," Gray replied. "By the time we had secured half the facility, we had lost 7 of our 12 team members. 7 elite warriors, against what we thought were mere scientists, stood imposingly in the dimly lit room. But there was one human in particular, their head of security. I still remember the first time I saw him. Tall for his species, with markings on his skin, tattoos, they call them, and eyes that seemed to calculate everything. While the others fought defensively, he was different. He fought with purpose, with strategy." Engineer Rock clicked his jaw nervously. "What happened next, Commander?" "We cornered him in the facility's central laboratory. 4 of us against 1 human. The odds were clearly in our favor." Gray's outer membranes tensed. A sign of stress among his kind. "We were wrong." Gray pointed toward the holographic screen in the center of the recreation room. It activated, displaying the blueprints of the human facility. The head of security had rigged the entire laboratory with traps. When we entered, he triggered an electromagnetic pulse that disabled our enhanced vision systems. We were temporarily blinded, though the rest of our senses remained perfectly intact. He paused, slowly clicking his jaws. We heard him move, almost silently compared to our own. Then came a sound I'd never heard before. A rhythmic series of explosions. "Projectile weapons," Officer R said quietly. "Primitive, but effective." "Yes," Gray agreed. "They weren't energy weapons like ours, so the pulse didn't affect them." The first bullet struck Specialist Beck's right at the junction of his head and chest. One of the few vulnerable points in our exoskeleton. He died instantly. Gray's voice turned clinical, distant, as if that coldness helped him tell the story. Lieutenant Krell fired blindly toward the sound. The human was hit. We heard his cry of pain. But instead of retreating, he shifted position and fired again. Captain Drass was hit 3 times in his main heart chamber. Despite having backup engines, the damage was too severe. The young soldiers were completely mesmerized as Gray continued talking. When our vision systems rebooted, only 2 of us remained, Lieutenant Green and me. The human was wounded, bleeding from his shoulder and side. We thought we had him. Gray's compound eyes darkened again with the memory, but then he did something we didn't expect. He ignited a container of lab chemicals, creating a wall of fire between us. We couldn't see him through the flames, but we heard a strange sound. "What was that?" whispered Scout Smith. "Laughter," Gray replied hollowly. The human was laughing. It wasn't a laugh of fear or despair. It was something else, as if he was enjoying the challenge. Medical Officer Stone's professional curiosity overcame his growing unease. "Some kind of combat stimulant, maybe a chemical enhancement." "That's what we thought at first," Gray replied. But by the time we surrounded the fire, he was gone. The lab had an emergency exit that we hadn't secured. The human had escaped into the woods surrounding the facility, but not before taking what we later discovered was the site's research data core. Gray's outer membranes quivered with unease. High Command ordered us to retrieve that data at all costs. We had to pursue him into the woods. Lieutenant Green and I prepared to track him. We still believed our superior biology gave us the advantage. The human was wounded, alone in unfamiliar terrain. 2 elite warriors against 1 wounded human seemed like good odds. Engineer Rock's antenna twitched, but they weren't, were they? "No," Gray replied quietly. "They weren't." The woods were dense, with 3 moons casting shifting shadows across the canopy. Our enhanced vision gave us perfect clarity, and we could smell his blood in the air. It should have been a simple track and eliminate mission. The commander's scarred hands clenched tightly. The first trap took out Lieutenant Green. A simple cord snagged across the path. Primitive technology. But when Green tripped over him, razor-sharp stakes shot down from the trees, piercing the weak points in his armor. Medical Officer Stone's antenna twitched nervously, but how could the human think so clearly with such grievous injuries? That was what we didn't understand, Gray continued. The trail of blood showed he was losing fluids at an alarming rate. According to our medical knowledge, he should have been unconscious, if not dead. But instead, he was thinking, planning, using the woods to his advantage. The young soldiers were completely focused as Gray described what happened next. I moved more cautiously after losing Green, but it was no use. The human had left false blood trails. I followed what I thought was the main trail, only to end up in a clearing with no sign of him. Gray's voice lowered, forcing the young men to lean in to listen. Then I heard his voice from behind me. He had somehow managed to flank me as I followed. He was only 10 body lengths away, partially hidden behind a tree. His wounds were worse than I had thought. His uniform was soaked with blood, one arm hanging uselessly at his side. Scout Smith's jaw clicked with anxiety. "What did you do, Commander?" "What any warrior would do." I raised my weapon and fired. Gray's outer membranes shuddered at the memory, but despite his injuries, the human moved with impossible speed. He dodged my shot and vanished into the undergrowth. Officer R leaned forward, but I'm sure he could have tracked him again. I tried, Gray continued. But the forest seemed to come alive with sounds, intentionally created sounds. The human was using earplugs, leading me deeper into territory he had prepared. Gray's scarred hand touched his prosthetic limb again. The next trap nearly cost me my life. A pit covered with vegetation. It wasn't just a pit. The bottom was lined with sharpened stakes, and what I later discovered was a modified plasma grenade, one of our own weapons that he'd found a way to repurpose. The young soldiers glanced nervously at each other as Gray described how he narrowly avoided falling into the trap. I only survived because of our natural caution on unstable ground. But as I backed away from the pit, I heard that sound again. Human laughter echoing through the trees. Engineer Rock's antennae flattened against his head, a sign of mounting horror. He was enjoying hunting him. Not exactly, Gray replied. I learned later that laughter was something else, a response to stress, to impossible situations. The human was nearly dead, yet he was still fighting. He was still thinking 3 steps ahead. Commander Gray stood fully upright, his shadow sweeping across the recreation room. Night was falling. He'd been hunting that human for hours, and somehow he'd turned the tables. I wasn't the hunter, I was the prey, and that revelation changed everything. The young soldiers watched as their commander's outer membranes paled slightly, a sign of deep emotional stress among his species. Then I did something none of ours had ever done in combat, Gray said, almost in a whisper. I tried to communicate with him. Medical Officer Stone's antennae shot up in surprise. He tried to speak to the human. Why? Because I needed to understand, Gray replied. Just to know how this dying creature kept fighting, kept outlasting me. I activated my translator and spoke to him. Scout Smith leaned closer, completely captivated. What did you say? I offered him medical attention in exchange for his surrender, Gray replied. I told him he had fought well, but that he couldn't survive his wounds without help. I explained that continuing to resist was illogical, given his biological limitations. Gray's compound eyes darkened with the memory. There was silence for a long moment, and then came his reply. Words I will never forget as long as I live. The recreation room was completely silent as Commander Gray recalled the human's response. He laughed again, but this time it was different, softer, almost resigned. Then he spoke in a firm voice despite his injuries. You really don't understand us, do you? He said. Gray's outer membranes flickered rapidly. I didn't understand his response. I had offered him life, medical treatment, an honorable end to the fight. By all logic, a severely wounded warrior should accept those terms. And what happened next? Officer re-asked, his voice barely audible. The human partially emerged from cover. Even now I remember every detail. Gray's scarred hands trembled slightly. His uniform was soaked with blood. He had 3 plasma burns on his body. His left arm hung uselessly at his side. By any rational standard, he should have been dead by now. The commander paused, and his compound eyes dimmed slightly, but his eyes, not those of a dying creature, burned with something I had never seen before. It wasn't rage or fear, but pure, relentless determination. Scout Smith's antenna twitched. What did he say? He asked me a question. Gray continued. Do you know why humans reached the stars? I didn't answer. So he answered himself. Because we refuse to accept biological, physical, technological limitations. They're all problems that can be overcome. Gray's voice softened, forcing the young soldiers to lean in to hear. Then he explained something that completely changed what I thought I knew about humans. He told me about their evolutionary history, how they evolved as persistence hunters. Persistence hunters, interrupted Medical Officer Stone, letting his professional curiosity overcome his unease. Their ancestors would chase prey for days, Gray explained. They weren't the strongest or fastest predators, but they could outlast anyone. They would follow an animal until it collapsed from exhaustion, relentlessly tracking it across any terrain. The commander's outer membranes quivered. The human explained that this gave them something unique, the ability to keep functioning despite pain, exhaustion, or injury. Their bodies developed systems that kept them active when any other rational species would have shut down. Engineer Rock clicked his jaw. Incredulous. That can't be possible. The energy expenditure alone. That's where their biology becomes truly terrifying, Gray interrupted. The human explained the chemicals their bodies produce, adrenaline, endorphins, cortisol, substances that push them far beyond their normal limits. Gray activated a small holographic display on his wristband that showed human anatomical diagrams. Those chemicals change everything. Their blood vessels constrict to reduce bleeding. Their pain receptors shut down. Their muscles receive more oxygen. They become something entirely different when they feel threatened. Explorer Smith's antenna lowered in confusion, but that wouldn't destroy their systems. It wouldn't cause total organ failure. Yes, Gray agreed. And yet they do. That's what makes them so terrifying. A cornered human doesn't weaken, they become stronger, more dangerous. Their bodies literally sacrifice future survival for maximum effectiveness in the present. The young aliens remained utterly silent, awestruck as Gray continued. The human head of security was living proof of that. By his own admission, he was dying. The stimulant chemicals flooding his system were the only thing keeping him alive and simultaneously accelerating his death, but they gave him just enough strength for one last mission, to ensure the research data didn't fall into our hands. Medical Officer Stone's professional detachment began to waver. That biological response defies all evolutionary logic. The human said something similar, Gray replied. He told me, it's not about the survival of the individual, it's about the survival of the group. One of us may die, but we make sure it costs you dearly, so much so that you'll think twice before coming for the others. The commander's voice turned hoarse. It was then that I realized we had completely misjudged humans from the start. We saw their biological weaknesses as evidence of inferiority, but those same weaknesses led them to develop compensatory abilities that made them infinitely more dangerous. Gray's compound eyes seemed to gaze beyond the recreation room, lost in memory. The human and I talked for several minutes. A strange moment of connection amidst the fighting explained to me that human military doctrine is based on this concept of sacrifice. Individuals willing to pay any price to protect their objectives. First Scout Smith leaned forward. And what happened next, Commander? Gray's outer membranes paled even more. I made another mistake. I thought that understanding humans made them less dangerous. I thought the conversation meant the human was ready to surrender. His voice dropped to a whisper. I was wrong. The young soldiers felt a chill despite the room's comfortable temperature as Gray described what happened next. I stepped fully into the clearing, lowering my weapon slightly, not completely, but enough to show good faith. I told him our medical technology could save him, that there was no need to die for his mission. Gray's scarred hands clenched tightly. The human stared at me for a long moment. Then he said, "You still don't understand. This isn't about surviving." And before I could react, he moved faster than any dying creature should be capable of. The commander's voice turned clinical, emotionally detached. The human had concealed a small projectile weapon. One moment we were talking, and the next he fired. The bullet struck the joint of my right lower limb, a precise shot that shattered the connection point. The young aliens involuntarily stared at Gray's synthetic limb as he continued. I fell, but my combat training kicked in immediately. I rolled, returned fire, and hit him 2 more times in the center of his torso. Impacts that would have brought any of us down instantly. Gray's outer membranes visibly twitched. He didn't even flinch. He kept advancing. I managed to take cover behind a fallen tree. I called for emergency extraction. But Gray paused, searching for words. This human was unlike anything I'd ever faced before. He wasn't fighting to win anymore, he was fighting because it was all he had left. A heavy silence fell over the recreation room. The young soldiers could see genuine anguish in their commander's posture, something none of them had ever witnessed. What the human did next, Gray finally said, showed me the true meaning of terror. Commander Gray's voice became hollow as he continued, as if each word physically pained him. The human had circled around while I was distracted by my wound. I thought he would approach from the same direction we'd been talking. Instead, he somehow moved silently through the undergrowth. Despite his injuries, Gray's outer membranes flickered rapidly. He fell from above, just as he had with Lieutenant Green. The young soldiers, unaware, touched their own armored exoskeletons as Gray described what happened next. I perceived the movement too late. The human fell directly onto my back. His weight knocked me down. By all logic, the impact should have reopened his wounds, causing him debilitating pain, but he moved with deadly precision. Gray touched the marked area around his faceplates. That's when I discovered another terrifying truth about humans. Their bones don't break cleanly like ours. His voice wavered slightly. They splinter. Medical Officer Stone showed professional interest despite his growing horror. They splintered when the human hit me, Gray explained.